Welcome to a very special breaking news edition of the Timmy Did What podcast. The New York Times, ladies and gentlemen, is covering what Tim Ballard is doing. So, welcome my co-host, Ryan Fisher, featured in the article.
Hi, everybody.
And my name is Kara Burrell. Welcome to the Timmy Did What podcast.
This is a really big day because the New York Times is one of the most respected journalistic organizations in America. Very far-reaching. They kind of set the tone and stage for a lot of other journalists.
I can already hear maybe some like different conservative voices. I just saw a comment from people saying like, well, what about if a conservative more newspaper, could pick this up? This seems like the deep state, or this is just what Tim Ballard has always been saying, that, these like smear campaigns from the very elites at the New York Times. Well, I do agree that it's absolutely has tons of journalistic integrity. If that is initially what somebody is coming into this video thinking, I just want to remind you that Tim has been disowned by his church. His friends like Glenn Beck and Sean Reyes announced that they believe these women, and Tim has been kicked out of his own church, excommunicated from the Mormon Church. He's been kicked out from his own organization that he started, Operation Underground Railroad. And with articles like this that are so mainstream, there is a consensus, and it feels like there is just nowhere else for him to hide. And I believe that the truth and the evidence is absolutely on the women's side. So if Tim chooses to smear this New York Times, Mike Baker, the women, anyone else, if that is, people who are still believing that this is a conspiracy against Tim Ballard to forward, these horrible crimes against children. I'd just like to remind you all that, guys, we're at the point where you'd have to smear Mike Baker's sources along with every other institution that is onto Tim's crimes. One of them being my co-host here, Ryan Fisher, his rape victims, Kira Lynch and Celeste Boris, who are quoted in this article, who we have become good friends and advocates for. You'd have to smear the Mormon Church for excommunicating him, all the famous friends I mentioned who have dropped Tim, the FBI for investigating him, and the Utah County Crime Lab for matching his semen to Celeste's skirt. So what I just said, that is just the beginning. So it's bigger than the New York Times, but it is amazing that somewhere outside of Utah has picked this up. And we're going to get into the entire article and read it for you now. So Ryan, any other thoughts?
Oh, just that this isn't a political hit job. That's what he's going to defend it as. It's, it's attack on conservatism or something like that. That was almost never even brought up in the many conversations I had with Mike Baker. And so you read the article for itself. He really wanted to get down to what actually happened and took place and get the facts laid out there for the nation to know about. And I think he did a fabulous job of doing just that. So yeah, let's launch into it.
All right. And just like to remind everybody that Ryan and I do this out of our own, our own budget and our own just free time. And it would really mean a lot that if you could at least subscribe to this channel. We're going to be putting out, like it says at the bottom, OUR broadcasts every week. Please hit the bell for notifications so you don't miss any new videos that drop, because we're going to be continually reporting on this. This has been a day that we've been waiting for a long time, when things hit the mainstream and more people are going to be interested in this story. And we want to be able to bring you the news. And we're also working on a documentary that we're also hoping to get funded. So links are down below to our Patreon that has more exclusive behind the scenes things. We have all kinds of things over on our Patreon that we would love for you guys to go check it out. Just a couple bucks a month. We don't want to have to quit this podcast. So we are kind of at a crossroads because we need to be able to bring some donors in and some funds in. So we have a Venmo at Caribbean and a a donor box that goes to my nonprofit. So all donations are tax deductible in the United States. So right off the top, anybody who can help donate to this podcast, whether through super chats, anything, even if it's just subscribing and hitting the bell for notifications, that would help out a lot. Yep. Okay, so beginning with the title, it says, "To the world, he is an anti-trafficking hero. Women tell a different story." Ryan, do you want to just go back and forth reading paragraphs?
Sure.
Popcorn.
That works.
All right.
Like we're in Sunday school.
Yeah. Tim Ballard's work on sex trafficking became the basis of a hit movie, Sound of Freedom. But a series of women in lawsuits and interviews have accused him of being a sex predator. So this article just came out by Mike Baker, who flew out to Salt Lake City to do this reporting, had some really gorgeous pictures that have been taken by a New York Times photographer as well. So this is as legit as it gets right now. So up front, we have a picture of Tim Ballard in 2023 at the Turning Point Action General Session in West Palm Beach, Florida. All right, Ryan, take it away.
Tim Ballard had fashioned himself into a made-for-Hollywood hero. For years, he led a nonprofit that proclaimed daring undercover missions to rescue children from the horrors of international sex trafficking. Politicians embraced his call for more barriers on the southern border to block smuggling. President Donald J. Trump brought him on as an advisor. Last year, the hit movie Sound of Freedom showcased his life and work, making more than $250 million and becoming one of the most successful independent films of all time.
All right, getting people familiar with where you might have seen this guy. But while the world knew him as a champion of the vulnerable, many of the women he worked with will now tell a much darker story. That Mr. Ballard himself was grooming, manipulating, harassing, and sexually assaulting women. In lawsuits beginning last year, the women said that Mr. Ballard preyed on their desire to help trafficking victims, coercing or forcing them into sexual encounters as part of their undercover work in brothels, strip clubs, and massage parlors.
A former Homeland Security agent, Mr. Ballard had built his nonprofit, Operation Underground Railroad, at a time when the issue of child sex trafficking was already on the rise. High-profile cases, some of them appallingly real, some of them inventions of conspiracy theorists, drove outrage about minors being forced into sexual servitude and exploited by U.S. elites. What he's referring to here is the Jeffrey Epstein stuff and also the QAnon conspiracy theory that was rising at that time.
Mr. Ballard won credibility across the varied worlds of religion, law enforcement, media, politics, and entertainment. That's a great sentence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
really.
It's a really vast empire that he was building.
Religion, law enforcement, that he knows what he's doing as a religious, spiritual guy, as a law enforcement guy with Homeland Security, in media and politics and entertainment. And it's interesting because in our episode that we just posted last night, Ryan, when you anyone wants to go check out what Ryan just did last week, which was testify against Tim Ballard on behalf of Kelly Suarez on this Colombian trial, that one great thing that Ryan mentions is this kind of gotcha question that the would be the prosecution was asking him about, was the intention for Tim Ballard to go to Colombia to save kids or basically not save kids? And Ryan, what did you have to say in the end?
I went back and forth with the prosecutor trying to get a definition of purpose, and I went with a definition, main purpose, and the main purpose was not to save kids. The main purpose is exactly what he identified right here. It was religious purposes, influencing law enforcement, media outlets, politics, and entertainment. That's what the main purpose was about. Fame, money, accolades from being a national hero. That was the goal. And
yeah,
saving kids was just the vehicle to accomplishing those things.
Exactly. And what I want people who might be skeptical of this, because I was reading the comments on Instagram and the New York Times article, people are reading this headline and they're saying, oh, just some women are just in it for the money. This is something I can just absolutely ignore. No. I want everyone to really pay attention to this article. If you're on the fence, if you need any convincing, that you will see from this article that what is just listed there, it doesn't say that he won credibility amongst anybody who is in law enforcement and actually works to end sex trafficking, because of things that we're going to be reading about, of what his tactics were, what his intelligence was to do. He's not respected in the circles of, credible sex trafficking, anti-sex trafficking organizations. Okay. So by 2020, Operation Underground Railroad was raising nearly $50 million a year in donations, with a roster of supporters that included the conservative media mogul Glenn Beck, the motivational speaker Tony Robbins, and the Pittsburgh Steelers coach Mike Tomlin.
In Utah, where the organization's leadership is based, Mr. Ballard talked up his close connections to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, at times appearing alongside one of the church's 12 powerful apostles. As concerns about his contact began percolating last year, the empire he created appeared to be crumbling. In June 2023, he stepped down from Operation Underground Railroad. The Latter-day Saint Church last September denounced Mr. Ballard's morally unacceptable activities in a statement to Vice News, which had published a series of stories raising questions about the nonprofit's operations. This is interesting to me because I was really curious to see if the church was going to come out with an updated statement, and they haven't yet. Mike Baker, I know, reached out to Doug Anderson and the church PR department, which declined comment from what I understand. And so he went back to the previous statement that the church gave back in September, a year ago, denouncing Mr. Ballard as morally unacceptable activities. I would really, really, really like to know what specifically was morally unacceptable according to their internal personal investigation. I think that would be very beneficial for us because it leaves some ambiguity, you know? There are still a lot of members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints that are supporting him, that are backing him, that are fundraising in his stake and church circle groups. He's pushing the narrative that the church denounced him by some low-level PR person that didn't have authorization from the top. And that's simply not true. I've talked with people that can confirm, and many others have, that the denouncement came from the top. So that clarification by itself would be wonderful to make. I think we need to remove ambiguity from these kind of statements, and probably take a very clear, transparent position. And so I hope the church would talk to Mike Baker and give an updated response and statement on this, but so far they haven't. And hopefully after this, maybe with all the eyes turning to Utah.
And yet, in many conservative circles, Mr. Ballard's star kept rising. At the Conservative Political Action Conference in February, Mr. Ballard was on stage arguing that failure to manage the southern U.S. border has turned federal agencies into a child trafficking delivery service. Quote, he received a Heroic Patriot Award at a Catholic Prayer for Trump event at Mar-a-Lago in March. Everyone might remember let me make myself on screen again. Everyone, hopefully you'll remember some videos that I did on my channel when that came out, that there was Catholic prayers for Trump, and the guy on stage is like, he's told me that he's considering the Catholic faith, and he's wearing his Mother of Mary necklace and stuff. And my joke about that is that you compare the life of Joseph Smith and the life of Tim Ballard, and he basically was excommunicated from his church for acting too much like the founder of Mormonism. Maybe now he wants to be a Catholic. And in July, Mr. Trump's former lawyer, Rudolph W. Giuliani, hosted Mr. Ballard on his podcast from the Republican National Convention, encouraging him not to be discouraged and assuring him that he had many allies and a promising future. But questions about Mr. Ballard's conduct at Operation Underground Railroad have continued, and more women have come forward. The New York Times interviewed 10 who worked with Mr. Ballard at the organization and now describe their time there as a nightmare of sexual harassment, coerced sexual contact, and sexual assault.
Let me add to this. So a lot of these people that he interviewed, I know personally, some of them are amazing people that don't want to come forward because they see all the smear tactics and the character assassination that he does to anybody that comes forward, including yours truly and Kara as well. And so they don't want to be dragged through the mud, and I don't blame them at all. But he's talked to a lot of people, not just the 3 or 4 that are featured in this article, but I'm glad he put that in there, that there's 10 different women that he's talked to that are all telling the same story. I mean, the same story of spiritual manipulation, grooming, leading to sexual assault.
Yeah.
Right? Not just isolated one-off, a couple of people getting together trying to make money like he's claiming. There is, and that's the tip of the iceberg. Seriously.
Yeah. Men and women as well. And in another video, we're going to have to get into his buddy Rad Barrett, who was arrested recently for DUI and having a bunch of narcotics in his car. And he's like I don't know, one of the number one lackeys and yes men and like intimidating women kind of forces that Tim Ballard has hired. And after that arrest, sounds like there's some reporting that Rad Barrett is now turned on Tim Ballard and trying to strike a deal to expose what he knows. So I saw one text message so far from Rad Barrett who says that Tim is guilty AF, his words, and sounds like he's ready to turn on him and expose everything that he knows. So people are dropping like flies because Tim's behavior has been, so unhinged and so dangerous and so harmful for so long that this ship is absolutely sinking and people are bailing, So finally, also Fluffy the bear cat for the $50 super sticker. Thank you so much. That helps a ton. Okay. I'll read the next one. Then Ryan, you want to read the one after that?
Sure.
Okay. Many had long ties to the Latter-day Saints and said in lawsuits and interviews that they initially trusted Mr. Ballard because of his broad acclaim and the support he had received from the church leadership, and they believed deeply in the cause of saving children. There he is with Trump.
Yeah, that's so huge. I mean, I don't think people outside of Utah that aren't Mormon or familiar with the Church of Jesus Christ, Latter-day Saints, and the culture, the support from and praise and acclaim from a quorum of the 12 apostles is so huge. I mean, like it's bigger than, they are bigger than the presidency of the United States in Utah.
100%. Yeah.
I mean,
what they say goes in Mormonism.
What they say goes. They speak for God, and that's the religious. So it's akin to having basically direct access to God. Whatever the Quorum of the 12 First Presidency says, that they are mouthpieces for God in this religion and in this culture. And so it is so huge to have that kind of endorsement. I don't think you can really appreciate or understand how monumental that is unless you are part of a system that's similar to that.
Mm-hmm.
So,
right. Cannot be overstated how important that is.
In interviews and legal papers, the women described similar scenarios. Mr. Ballard recruited them to act as his romantic partner in undercover operations in which they would pose as wealthy sex tourists, a tactic he referred to as the couple's ruse. It had two purposes, he told them. It provided an easy excuse to avoid having sexual contact with the sex workers, and some people might be more open to confiding in a woman.
The couple's ruse came to him from Elder Ballard, maybe Tom Harrison, maybe a ketamine relative, but either way, we will be covering that specific part of the sexual assault and what was in his mind with the couple's ruse and where he got it from in future episodes, because that is the entire kit and caboodle of the spiritual manipulation all the way to forced rape of some of these people who are working at OUR who just wanted to save sex trafficked kids, believed that Tim Ballard was called of God. And if he's called of God and this is the tactic that God gave him, who am I to say no to it? So it's a very big piece of the entire fraud of Tim Ballard and how he thought he was going to save sex trafficked kids. So just also
we are going to bring you the chain of events and beliefs that led to these kind of practices, because we can trace them all the way back to the religious dogmas, the religious beliefs, and the religious teachings, and who presented those to Tim through, just a crazy, absolutely insane sequence of a religious spiritual experience and revival, and that involved psychics and Mormon theology and the belief that dead presidents were appearing to him. Stuff that if it wasn't true, it'd be too hard to believe. Really, it would be. But we have that story. We're going to bring that to you. So Mike Baker didn't go down that rabbit hole in this one, but we will, because we have the documentation and we know the whole story. So stay with us for that one.
Yeah. And in the meantime, do all the research you want on Visions of Glory and Tom Harrison, because that is the holy grail of all of this Tim Ballard shit show. So much stuff to come. Probably the biggest, most exclusive things that you'll ever. Our brains have been exploding this week with what we've been learning, but hold off. But so much spiritual, manipulation from all the highest layers of the Mormon church. It's coming down with things you would not believe. Okay. So,
but many of the women say that Mr. Ballard turned the ruse into an opportunity to assault them. 6 women filed lawsuits accusing Mr. Ballard of sexually assaulting them, with some describing situations in which he used his strength to overpower them, despite their explicit pleas to stop.
That is, and we know, I've met them. Some of these women, like, they couldn't even leave their house for a year. They've been so afraid to speak up. They need, like, their teenage kids to go pump their gas for them, because even just saying these things publicly are so serious. They take them very seriously, and they have the evidence. I've met them. I've seen them. These are very, very traumatized and shaken up women. We'll get into their stories even more right now. So
and Tim will say that that he never spiritually manipulated women into doing something that they weren't comfortable doing, trying to cast doubt and ambiguity to some of the statements. But they are saying, and they have said multiple times, they were pleading for him to stop, to get off them and stop what he was doing. It was an explicit stop message in multiple occasions. So, like, spiritual manipulation and grooming, that all happened, but straight up assault happened as well.
Yeah, always just a good reminder anytime we can just get out the word that, like, not having an enthusiastic yes if you're, like, in a sexual situation, like, especially like what Tim Ballard is accused of doing here, like with penetration, like, holy crap, if it's not an enthusiastic yes, it's a definite no. So I don't know. I think I've been Mormon 30 years of my life. I don't think I was taught that. I don't think the boys were taught that. I don't think Tim Ballard, even if somebody told him every single day and had neon lights and, like, tattooed it on his forehead for him to look at in the mirror every day, he would even remember that. But that being said, it's a good thing to remember, kind of like stop, drop, and roll, not having an enthusiastic yes. It's an absolute no. So you should probably stop.
Was no consent given. No consent given so many times. It says explicitly he used his strength to overpower them. That's what just, it just, I don't know. It makes me sick. I don't know what else to say. It makes me sick.
Absolutely. And again, meeting these women, I dedicated a whole podcast to them, basically. So 3 of the women told the Times that they witnessed Mr. Ballard engaging in erotic encounters with sex workers, ranging from lap dances to oral sex. Oh my. And we also have evidence from the lawsuit that the CEO, Matt Osborne, engaged in, like, sex in a hotel room with some escorts. That's kind of was a norm of OUR's organization, of how they catch sex traffickers, by hiring prostitutes and sleeping with them. So we'll get into that even more. So the women were called...
Welcome to the real OUR. That's a quote from Tim in reference to this kind of stuff.
Welcome to the real OUR.
The real OUR. Yeah, he put that in a text message after talking about this kind of stuff.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. I'll read the next one, then you can read the one after that. The women were called being stunned and confused by Mr. Ballard's conduct, alarmed but not only by how he acted on operations, but how much he expected the women to practice their romance in private. Many described feeling isolated and fearful, as Mr. Ballard warned that disclosing operational details could allow powerful traffickers to identify and kill them.
Amy Morgan Davis, a former Miss Utah who worked as Mr. Ballard's makeup artist on a variety of occasions over several years, is among the women who said that Mr. Ballard exploited her desire to participate in the cause of rescuing children. She recalled meetings with Mr. Ballard in which he repeatedly told her to prove that the two of them had a connection, and then made escalating sexual advances that included caressing her body with his hands. I've heard so many stories of Tim using different methods to prove somebody's loyalty by accusing them in front of others of doing something they didn't do to see how they would react. And if they were apologetic and remorseful and like, I'm sorry, I didn't do that, but I'm sorry you felt that way, and they fall in line, then he'll say, all right, yeah, I know you didn't do that, but you passed the test. It was just a test. I mean, this is like psychological mind games from a master manipulator that's just absolutely disgusting. And I've heard that story from multiple other people, not in a sexual way, but in a test of loyalty way, you know? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
From every different angle. Okay. It's hard to wrap your head around that because you really, in your mind, want him to be a hero, she said, sharing her story publicly for the first time. While the courts have dismissed some of the legal claims against Mr. Ballard, the 6 sexual assault claims filed by the women are being actively litigated, and the Salt Lake County District Attorney's Office said it was aware of, quote, pending criminal investigations into Ballard. At least one was opened in a nearby county after one of the women filed an assault report with the police. So a lot of things are said there, and just for time's sake, we won't get into them, but Tim likes to claim right now that like every single lawsuit against me is just being dropped right now, and they're going to be so sorry that they ever did anything against me. And so all I can say is sometimes people file lawsuits and the judge says, please file this in a different, what's the word I'm looking for? Like it needs to be refiled in like its proper. Ryan, finish my sentence.
Yeah, it was refiled in a different jurisdiction or in a different way that makes sense in a different court. So some of them were dismissed but refiled later for legal reasons. It doesn't mean that the allegations go away, though.
Right. So claims
and what
that
he should be
are
more concerned about than those is the pending criminal investigations. I just can't wait for him to get arrested and charged with a crime so he'll shut up about calling all this a money grab, by women that are just seeking money, because there's pending criminal investigations, and hopefully those will bring about charges in the near future, because that's what needs to happen.
Yeah, when those jail doors close, cha-ching, and he goes screaming to all the people in the jail cell, you guys all work for the sex traffickers for putting me back here, I guess. So it's not enough for just the FBI and different states investigating him, different Utah counties, the Utah County Crime Lab finding his semen, all of those people, everybody who smears him, everything is just a big smear campaign against the number one guy who stops sex traffickers from selling kids, even though he has no kids to even show that he's actually saved. So nope, all those people are all working for the sex traffickers, right?
A couple people are in the comments asking if he still has the Attorney General's friend. That's a very good question. That we know that the Attorney General, Sean Reyes, is still the Attorney General in Utah, even being embroiled in this whole scandal. He was also named in the Susan Whitehead lawsuit, but they had a meeting in which he apologized to her, and in a way that she decided to drop his name from that lawsuit. He has since came out and said that he believes the women. However, he is involved in the operations that Tim is involved in, and it has been told to me that Tim has incriminating video of Sean from a party in Salt Lake. I think that was reported on in a couple of news outlets also. And so the question is Sean Reyes compromised in his ability to administer law enforcement and justice in the state of Utah? I don't know, because I don't know the inside, but it shocks me that there isn't an internal inquiry in the Senate of Utah, that our Congress people aren't demanding an internal inquiry to see if our Attorney General has been compromised. Governor Cox initially came out disgusted and in opposition to Tim and actually called for an investigation, and then suddenly went silent and has been silent for a long time. And the media, most of the media in Utah has been silent for a very long time. Probably see how this plays out, but it all smells like a cover-up, if I can put it that way. I don't have any inside information that there is a cover-up, but I would really like to see the law enforcement authorities in Utah and the government authorities in Utah step forward, play a leadership role, and sort this mess out. We made this mess in Utah. We need to clean it up, if I can put it that way.
We made this mess in Utah, so we better clean it up. Okay. Well said. Okay. Right here, filed, at least one was opened in a nearby county after one of the women filed an assault report with the police. Okay. So again, every sentence in here is like 5 hours we could explain, but go ahead.
Yeah, seriously.
All right. Sorry, Mr. Ballard. Yeah.
All right. Mr. Ballard, who declined to be interviewed for this article, which is surprising because he's had so much to say about me and about us and about everything the last few weeks. Mr. Ballard, who declined to be interviewed for this article, has insisted that he did not engage in any misconduct, but that in the gritty world of international sex industry, it was essential to maintain believable covers. He contended that the women accusing him had come together to repeat each other's lies and were now out to get millions of dollars. He or his lawyers have said some of the women were the ones acting inappropriately and that their stories have been inconsistent. Victim blaming, right?
That accusing the women
allowed to defend himself, but victim blaming. If they were acting inappropriate, where are all the other the 10 other OUR operators that said, oh yeah, this woman also came on to me, also tried to get my clothes off, also put me on a massage table and sexually assaulted me? I'm not seeing any of those reports. Are you? I haven't been made aware of them. It seems to be an entire group of women against one man, one individual, and not the other way around. So bring us the supporting evidence, bring us the other testimonies. We'll hear you out, Tim. We will. We'll give you a shot. Back up your claims.
Yeah. Unfortunately, there's people like, Bill Cosby, can think of executives all across the world and all kinds of famous people, was 70 women coming at Bill Cosby or, all the women who came against Harvey Weinstein. It's not out of the realm of just possibility that somebody like Tim Ballard, who has amassed also a lot of fame, especially in these spiritual angles, that he could abuse a lot of women, and that it's just more of a numbers thing that he abused a lot of women. So a lot of women are coming together. It's not that he's innocent and all these women he's worked for, that they're just repeating each other's lies. Maybe they're just repeating a similar pattern of what Tim did to them. Same as, Bill Cosby's victims or Harvey Weinstein's victims. So
this next sentence in here makes my stomach turn, because it's one of the denial and deflect tactics that he does, that he tries to deflect our attention. And he did this to me. He did this to a lot of people when issues were brought up about his conduct and behavior. He tried to deflect it to the bigger picture, some grand vision for being a force for good in the world. As it says here, Mr. Ballard said one of his chief concerns was that the accusations had done grave harm to the mission of rescuing children. I just find it so sad that everyone who has come out with negative smears, lies, lawfare, that they are accomplices to child trafficking. He said in an online video, their actions are causing children to suffer, to be raped, to be tortured.
And if you don't mind, Ryan, can I do one thing real quick?
Please.
Just going to let Tim, they haven't seen this type of angry, ranting, visceral reaction. He's repeated this on pretty much every time he's put on a camera in front of him. So for instance,
anyone listening, how dare you or anybody dictate to a child, because it's easier you're not going to hurt me. To a child, you're going to tell that child what kind of rescue they need. And if it doesn't fit into the worldview that you have, then I guess they're better off not being rescued.
The couple's ruse doesn't fit into the worldview I have about how to successfully rescue kids. Not because it's just like an opinion, it's because it's based on fact from credible like anti-sex trafficking organizations. It's not a worldview, it's just a fact of the matter that the couple's ruse, even in its best of intentions, is not a good idea. Nonetheless, the way that Tim Ballard practiced it. So I will dictate the way that I think a child should be rescued, especially considering the ways that Tim Ballard and OUR have flagrantly at this point created markets for sex trafficking where it didn't quite exist there before. So instead of actually tackling things at a systemic level, they create markets, they go in and they want to play Rambo and rescue kids because that creates a better story and a better myth than actually saying, hey, I got some some reform to take more people out of poverty and some legislation passed. It's not quite as sexy as Tim Ballard toting around guns and videos that he's not even allowed to shoot in foreign countries. It's all part of this big myth, evidenced by the fact that the Sound of Freedom is 110% false, made up. So,
yeah, I really see that his that statements like what just played are almost admissions that he has done something wrong and that he has been sexually immoral or assaulted women, because he's trying to defend like, hey, you don't like what I'm doing? You don't like the ways I'm doing it? Well, how dare you criticize how children should be rescued? You know, it really hits me as an admission of guilt. You see that? That's how it hits me. Like he's just trying to deflect. Like he should have a complete pass on doing anything that he wants because rescuing kids is the primary goal. And if sometimes he has to get his hands dirty in order to do that. That's his argument. Whether that holds up in court, we'll see.
It's hopefully a manipulation. It's a deflection of how dare you dictate this thing that you've heard about that I do. No, Tim, tell us, what do you do? Tell us about how the couple's ruse is super successful. Have, the kids that you've saved come forward, assuming that they're old enough and can, that tell us and give us evidence that your tactics actually do work. Because when we're criticizing the tactics and women are coming out saying that they were raped during your tactics, we're going to be critical of them. But this is obviously, a clear manipulation, pulling on people's heartstrings. We're like, oh, okay, I guess he was Department of Homeland Security at some point. Never mind that, every credible organization has denounced his tactics. But I don't know how kids are rescued out of sex trafficking. He must know. No. That is the exact way that all of these women were conned into this couple's ruse, saying that he must know better than I do. No, this is just a clear logic and intuition problem. If you don't think that Tim Ballard needs to take women to foreign countries and practice the couple's ruse with them to save kids, you think as like a layperson that is probably not the best way. Everything that Tim Ballard has even admitted of how he saves trafficked kids. You're never mind the evidence too. You probably know more about it than Tim Ballard does. But don't criticize him, or else you are complicit with the traffickers.
Yeah, just listen to what he's saying. He's saying that anybody who attacks him, they are accomplices to child trafficking. Their actions are causing children to suffer, to be raped and tortured. Now, what is the justification for that? It's because he has to spend money on litigation that from his millions of dollars war chest that he says, I could have been saving kids, but now I got to spend it on litigation. And so that's just a disgusting deflection, and
that's what he
because
says.
His actions cause this litigation, because his actions are causing these criminal investigations, he has to deal with them, but it's not his fault. Can you see how he is absolutely incapable of taking accountability and responsibility for any of this? I mean, it's almost childish, in my opinion.
Right on. We could talk about this for so long about the kids he's not even
saving.
He's like, I could save more kids, but time and time again on our channel and other people as well have proved even the things he says that he is doing, like taking credit for certain operations. He didn't do that. That was the Mexican government did that. Nobody is aware that Tim Ballard had anything to do with saving X number of kids in X place, but he'll take the credit for it and say we could have saved 3 times as many. if these women weren't filing these lawsuits and so on and so forth.
As he left the Department of Homeland Security in 2013 to build his nonprofit, the issue of child sex trafficking was drawing more attention in the conservative political community. Mr. Ballard quickly won the support of commentators like Mr. Beck, who said on one of his shows that the cause was so important that supporting it may be one of the reasons why you were born. I was involved in all this that was happening at this time. I went with Tim to Glenn Beck Studios in Texas, and he got the red carpet rolled out for him. Glenn Beck took his message to heart, was enamored with it. Because of course it was blending American history with religion in a way that hadn't been connected in some of those ways before. And so Glenn Beck picked up on that. It was also being branded at the time as a non-Mormon message. Tim was in conversations that I was with his book publisher about creating a national version of the book, The American Covenant, to appeal to evangelical America. And this was all done at the direction of internal sources with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Tim got the red carpet treatment. Not only did Glenn promote him on his shows, but he actually turned over an entire broadcast to Tim to host for the first time. I mean, without any television experience. And I was down there and part of that. And Tim was seeking for employment with Glenn Beck TV at the time. He didn't get it, but he did get projects. And he, in fact, at one point wanted to publish book and also do some narrative fictional films through Glenn Beck TV. And he was just pitching projects left and right, seeing what would stick. So yeah, that was a very interesting time, and for the launch of his career in 2013, as he was trying to transition out of Homeland Security into his own organization or into Glenn Beck TV. And I could talk a long time about that. I'm hoping that Glenn would come forward at some point and talk with us, talk about the situation, because really at that time, there wasn't any indication that Tim was going to end up becoming the monster that we all now have to deal with today. I really see Glenn as a victim, as I was. I was a TV producer. I put Tim on my show. I platformed him for 4 years every Sunday on my TV show. And he deceived me. He deceived me. And it's a hard thing to admit that I was a part of this. It's not something I'm proud of. I wish I could have foreseen where he was going, but nobody imagined that he would go off the rails so far as he did. And I think that's probably true for Glenn. I haven't talked with him. I'd love to have a conversation with him about this, see what it looked like from his perspective, and when red flags started popping up, if any. Tim was really good about hiding those red flags. But let's keep going. Mr. Ballard had already gained a following for his writings and television shows about the Mormon faith. Ryan Fisher, who worked with him on a television series exploring Latter-day Saints history about a decade ago, said he attended a meeting in 2016 with Tim Ballard and the church elder Apostle M. Russell Ballard, who are not related. The apostle, Mr. Fisher said, talked about using television to make Ballard into an American hero. You're back?
I'm back. Just to sell. I heard my friend and my co-host's name being quoted in the New York Times article, and I ran back as fast as I could. Right. So you're an inside source to all of those things, giving great context to this New York Times article. But in summary, you have a grieving process, somebody said, to kind of go to of what you lifted up and the voices you amplified in the church. And don't we all? I wrote an article for Meridian Magazine when I worked for a very conservative, anti-gay marriage nonprofit before I left the church. So when we know better, we do better. Anyway.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Let's get through this statement of Mr. Fisher, whoever the heck that is.
All right.
Apostle Mr. Fisher talked about using television to make Mr. Ballard into an American hero who could help the church achieve its goal of appealing to mainstream evangelicals. Church officials declined to discuss Mr. Ballard's relationship with Apostle Ballard in detail, but said in a statement last year that he had betrayed their friendship.
So there is also a lot of talk around this thing called the second anointing that Tim Ballard is likely to have had, either that or some special blessings from people within the church, like Elder Ballard or Tom Harrison. And these blessings basically making it so that Tim Ballard believes that he can do anything and still make it to the highest levels of the celestial kingdom in Mormon heaven. So it's a very secret ceremony that most Mormons don't even know exists, that we have reason to believe that Tim Ballard did have. So with that combined with what Tim Ballard just said, and there's these secret networks within the church, and then to the church so forcefully, once Tim Ballard is kind of using this like free pass to assault women and do all of the things that he thinks he needs to do in the super righteous cause of what he was purported to have been doing. I don't know, saving sex trafficked kids, I hope. Along that road, doing something so morally despicable, reprehensible, the church won't tell us exactly what. It's not betraying the friendship with Elder Ballard. It's probably a lot of the stuff that we have right now. So all I'm trying to say is, if a church gives you a super secret ceremony that gives you a free pass to do a lot of things, thinking your salvation is secured, and you actually do use that free pass, and then the church should have to say something. It has a moral responsibility. It has a responsibility on behalf of what's happened to these women and these victims. So Ryan, if you're like, oh, I'm sad that I promoted him, the church should really get their own podcast and really apologize every day for giving him a second anointing ceremony and everything else. So
Yeah,
that's my rant on that. Okay.
all right.
So
said.
with video cameras documenting their operations, Mr. Ballard's nonprofit ranged widely in its search for trafficking victims, going into countries like Haiti, Colombia, and Mexico with rescue teams that included former Navy SEALs. Mr. Ballard and his partners would fly in and offer cash to people who could bring young girls to a party. The idea was to identify both traffickers and victims, collecting information for law enforcement agencies to pursue. Some of the operations led to major armed raids, capturing on camera and later broadcast to the world. Sound of Freedom featured one such mission in Colombia. Asterisks on all of those things I don't have time to get into.
Yeah.
Asterisks on The Sound of Freedom featured anything that Tim Ballard ever did in real life. Not true at all. So as Operation Underground Railroad prominence grew, its overall strategy became a point of debate amongst anti-trafficking experts. Some grew concerned about the organization's emphasis on the idea that children were being snatched into trafficking and that the solution was to snatch them back, which I kind of already talked about at the beginning of like all the people that he won credibility with, not the actual organizations that do this. And
yeah, it's like
that's
a interesting use of words, because he's saying snatching back, it's creating the problem and then solving the problem. It's like starting a forest fire and then being the hero because you put out the forest fire. Like that's what's happening. Creating the market for sex slaves by going around being sex tourists, and then saving the kids that you just brought into the market that weren't actually part of the market beforehand, as in the case of the Colombia raid in Cartagena with Kelly Suarez, which we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about it today, but this is hit first. So we're going to talk about this first, but we're going to get into that too.
Yes. And let me just add I have to add Simpsons references where I hear them when they're trying to save money. And Bart goes, I'll take up smoking and then give that up. And Homer's like, giving up smoking is one of the hardest things you'll ever do. Here's $5. And Lisa's like, what? He didn't do anything. Didn't he, Lisa? Didn't he? I'll take up smoking and give that up. Okay. Ryan, do you want to go ahead and read this section right here? And I also have to be right back in 2 seconds.
It was a simple narrative that donors liked, said Bridget Carr, the director of Human Trafficking Clinic at the University of Michigan Law School, but neglected the deeper reality that most victims of trafficking are brought into that world by people they know, and that combating the problem requires long-term investments, often in reducing poverty. I don't think any legitimate evidence-based organization would support the tactics of Operation Underground Railroad, Ms. Carr said. That's pretty huge. Those are this like in the lawsuit against, in the defense, in the trial and the lawsuit with involving Kelly Suarez, Angel Studios said that how are we supposed to know that Tim was a totally shady guy, did all these bad things? How are we supposed to know that? They should have done just even a little bit of research, because other organizations like what Ms. Carr is referring to were coming out in opposition of the tactics that the very public OUR was employing at that time. They're not the only ones, but very reputable anti-trafficking organizations, called out that that's not the best way to save kids, doing the couples ruse and things like that. Even though the couples ruse is part of some special forces training, it's being conducted by trained special forces military personnel in undercover situations. But bringing in like your hairstylist, say, hey, come practice the couples ruse with me, or an actress that has no experience being in any of these places, that's not smart. That's not that's not because you want the most effective law enforcement people in the room. It's because you see somebody that's you can probably manipulate and be vulnerable to your grooming tactics, in my opinion. Continuing on, Jordan Bree Ryder, who had a career in the Marine Corps and law enforcement before a decade of social work caring for survivors of sex trafficking, worked for a time with the Operation Underground Railroad as an independent contractor. In an interview, she said she was invited by Mr. Ballard to go out on operations and was appalled to see the organization handing out hundreds of dollars and telling potential traffickers that there was more money to be had if they could bring girls to them. If you're in an impoverished area and you hand a pimp a bunch of money and tell him to get you underage girls, he's going to get you underage girls, she said. That's like textbook creating a market. That's very well said. It's textbook entrapment. Think about how much power and influence and the greenback, like waving American dollars in front of impoverished people in these other countries, would have over them, and in an attempt to persuade them to do something that they normally wouldn't do. We have heard multiple stories, not just the Kelly Suarez situation, of Tim and OUR operatives waving money around, saying, "Hey, we'll give you all this money if you can bring us people to our party," and it's creating a market that didn't exist in these places. That's what I've been told over and over, and I'm begging any OUR operatives to come on, tell us what you know. If you've seen this, I know I've seen in the Davis County Attorney Report statements from various people that outlined exactly how this process worked, where they'd go on the beach, they'd start talking and asking people if they know of girls that they could have access to. And then they meet up with them a day or two later, and this kid, the 17-year-old kid, brought some girl to meet him, and it was obvious that the kid was not a trafficker. He had persuaded, and he asked them, "Hey, is this your girlfriend? Like, seriously?" And he's like, "Yeah." He's like, somehow this kid, I don't want to call him stupid, because it was in the context of he could provide probably a lot of money for his family if he participated in this pimping, in this trafficking with OUR operatives, but by persuading his girlfriend to go with these Americans and do some stuff. It's taken advantage of desperate people in desperate situations by throwing money in their face. And she said it perfectly. That is textbook creating a market. It's also textbook entrapment that wouldn't fly in the United States.
Yeah.
I'd pull this here.
Yeah. And then, just going along with, the entrapment issues, we're really heartbroken about the Kelly Suarez trial in Colombia that Ryan just went down to testify on behalf of Kelly and against Tim Ballard. And we have a full trip report that I just posted last night that you can watch. But while Tim is going around the internet and gloating about you know, getting this convicted child trafficker behind bars now, and we're gonna have to get into more of what the actual story is. But I just wanted to remind people that no matter how much gloating Tim does, where he says, "Oh, this is a convicted sex trafficker," there's usually a lot more nuance to what it is. And in Kelly Suarez's case, she is a completely innocent woman who literally was attending a party that she thought she was going to be paid $200 to attend, and so this is a post of, the 19 years in prison that I believe this totally innocent woman who is not a sex trafficker was just convicted of by Tim Ballard in Colombia this week. It's absolutely heartbreaking. But let's just point out who put up the ad on Facebook about the party. That was OUR. Who paid for the buses and boats to the island. Again, that's OUR. Who asked for a Black woman to go to the party for Paul Hutchinson because he specifically said that he likes to have anal sex with Black women, and got Kelly Suarez to go to this meeting that she otherwise wouldn't have been at. That'd be OUR.
That's why she was at the table, because she was requested by Paul Hutchinson, who had a fetish.
And not
character. He was in character, had a fetish for Black women.
Yeah. And she wasn't at the table, not because of what Tim Ballard has said about her all over the internet, that that he was so excited because he found one sex trafficking network and he was hoping that it could be such a big party that all the traffickers would bring in their competition. And so that's where he got Kelly Suarez, that she was like some big sex trafficker and that she had like this modeling agency where she would lure in kids, like in the Sound of Freedom movie. She didn't have a modeling agency. She wasn't Miss Cartagena. She literally was just a poor 19, 20-year-old girl who literally had an aspiring like modeling future perhaps, but
you wanted to meet people that could advance her career.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and then with all that being said, and who is patting themselves on the back for sending Kelly Suarez to prison for 19 years when she sold and trafficked no one? That's OUR. So please never forget that. Justice for Kelly. Justice.
Yeah, we're going to go into detail on that case, give you all the evidence, show you the video he's referring to, the delicate video. We're going to get into that. So stay with us.
I would not be here saying Kelly is absolutely innocent if I didn't absolutely believe it. So, and also Tim blocked me on Twitter this week. Good call. Good call. All right. My turn to read.
Yeah. The fake romantic tactic. That's where we left off.
Okay. The fake romantic tactic. Kira Lynch was a hairdresser in the Salt Lake City area, brought in one day to a private home where Mr. Ballard was staying to cut and dye his hair. In an interview with The Times and in a lawsuit, she described listening with interest as he talked about his relationship with Mr. Trump, his friendship with Apostle Ballard, and about the children he had rescued from sex slavery. Then he had a question: would you like to be involved? He told her he was looking for a new female partner to help him on operations, acting as his pretend girlfriend. God had brought him the idea for the couple's ruse. Miss Lynch recalled him saying, while she was initially wary of the idea, Mr. Ballard reassured her that there were strict rules, no kissing, no touching of private parts, and that it had all been sanctioned as a means of saving children by Apostle Ballard, considered by the church to be a living prophet whose teachings reflected the will of God. So she's very much bought and sold that this is, a very important guy, has a lot of swagger in these, different communities between Trump and the LDS church. He couldn't possibly be a bad guy. Here's this way that I get to take off your clothes, but it's kind of sanctioned, but don't worry, it won't be anything bad. It's a very obvious manipulation. And so if you're listening to this and you're like, well, I'm still not sold that any of this is true, this could be a total fabrication. Let's just also remind people that if he's saying that there's no kissing or touching of private parts, why did the Utah County Crime Lab find and match his semen to his executive assistant Celeste Boris's skirt? If he really is pumping out that this couple's ruse is a legit tactic and nothing improper ever happened, we wouldn't be having his DNA on his assistant's skirt. So if you don't want to believe any of this, them's the facts, though. Them's the facts. Ryan.
Yeah. And so Kira, I believe she was active member of the church at that time, along with her family and parents. And so I just can't emphasize enough how overwhelmingly persuasive it is that Tim says that all of this has been sanctioned as a means of saving children by Apostle Ballard, considered by the church to be a living prophet whose teachings reflected the will of God. That's like, you draw Elder Ballard's on board, the discussion stops.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. And so this was a grooming tactic that he used with Elder Ballard's name to groom women into accepting things that seemed wrong and immorally wrong. And I've been told that there is a video out there. I've been told by a very reputable source that I absolutely 100% trust, and multiple sources that have seen this video or are aware of it, that they were on an operation and somebody of prominence questioned the use of the couples ruse and Janet Russin's psychic intel for going after guardian stuff. And Tim got on the phone right there. He's like, I'm going to clear this up. And he calls Elder Ballard on speakerphone, on camera, who corroborates and says, yeah, all of this is supported and I sanction it. Now, that video, I've been told, is in the possession of the FBI as part of their investigation. And if you are somebody that knows where that video is, I would really like to corroborate whether that's true or not. Please reach out to us. I want to find that video and see if that's true. I've been told by multiple credible sources about this video and this footage, and I would like to know if that's true or not. So please reach out if you know where that video clip is and you're willing to share it off the record. I just want to corroborate that story. I just want to see if that's true and if my sources are telling me the truth. All right. Okay, let's move on.
So here's a picture of Kira. Ryan and I have both met her several times, and like I've said earlier in this, she's a beautiful soul inside and out, and absolutely has a story that I 1000% believe. And I've also seen the evidence in text messages enough that, Glenn Beck has also seen them, and he flips sides. He's also seen the evidence as well. So it's not just me. A lot of people are convinced by the evidence and the testimony of Kira here. Now, I just also want to point out one other thing. She is a beautiful woman. Tim Ballard, from the beginning, he's selecting couples ruse partners not based on their, undercover work or their law enforcement work. He's basing it sometimes on if they're just really hot. And I can see why he would want to pitch this idea of spiritual wives to certain women like Kira. So on the flip side, I've seen some comments online where people who are in the Tim Ballard camp who believe him have said, "Oh, well, look at all." Somebody literally, I read a comment where somebody said, "Oh, look at, she's had she wears a lot of makeup. She does her hair. Maybe she's had some plastic surgery or Botox or something." And women like that, yeah, they're going to go after Tim Ballard's money because they're so freaking hot. And if it was some ugly Anne of Green Gables kind of girl out here, she'd be more believable. But again, this is just blatant sexism and somebody obviously deflecting from the fact that no, Tim Ballard went after attractive women, and attractive women like Kira Lynch. So her
but
beauty,
what he wasn't
makes
expecting,
it more believable, actually.
What he wasn't expecting is for these women that are beautiful to be absolutely powerhouses of people, to come out and be so courageous that they stood up to face this monster and call him out for his crimes. I mean, think about what Kira did. She is in the middle of the most populous Mormon county anywhere in the world. She's surrounded all of her friends and neighbors. Her family are all part of this Mormon culture. The church, it dominates everything and everyone. And in that environment, Tim is revered as an absolute hero. She is in the same stake as him. He is absolutely revered as a hero in the wider church, and that is ground zero for Tim Ballard's kingdom. And she stands up alone, joins with some other women that have been through the same thing, and calls him out in that situation. I mean, when I heard that, I was absolutely blown away. And I honestly thought, these women are so stupid. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know the kind of person they're poking, the kind of bear they're poking at right now. They don't know. I thought they were like the stupidest people in the world. And then I got to know them, and it turns out they know exactly what they're doing.
And they were stopping it so no one doesn't happen to anyone else.
Yeah, it turns out they're the most courageous people in the world. It's seriously, to me, the most amazing and inspiring form of bravery that I've ever seen. And it's really the only reason I'm here doing this.
Same.
And that I'm sticking my neck out on the line, and I'm going to Columbia and testifying, because I take inspiration from all of them. If they can stand up in that environment and stick their neck out on the line and do what's right to try and help others and stop this guy, then maybe I can too. I'm just like riding their courage. And I really, every time that I think, why the heck am I doing this? What am I doing here? I got a family. I got a life. I want to be out mountain biking with my kids right now. I think, hey, there's Kira and Celeste and Sasha and all the other women. They are standing up. They are putting their lives on the line. They are an amazing source of inspiration and courage. Maybe I can do this too.
Chills, Ryan, chills. Yeah. Yes. Kira, we love you. And so important. I'm so glad that you mentioned all of that. Exactly. Okay. She said he told her not to discuss full details of the job prospect, but that night when she went to dinner at her parents' home, she shared that Mr. Ballard had been a new client. Miss Lynch's mother jumped up out of her chair and ran to the bookshelf in the living room, pulled out tomes of Latter-day Saint thought and history that Mr. Ballard had written. As her mother praised his work, her father said they had watched and admired the television series about the church that Mr. Ballard had done with Mr. Fisher. So they're huge fans of, Tim Ballard's Mormon American fan fiction that he wrote that's been sold at church bookstores, and also the TV show that Ryan here produced for many, many years with Tim Ballard. So
I know. I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry, Kira. I didn't know at the time. I didn't know that this was where I was going to go. So
yeah, isn't that insane? How does that feel, Ryan? I know we've talked about this before, but that is like, it's really hitting me too, of like that how much Kira is so inundated with this, and that now that we're friends and we've met her and like we're just in her corner rooting for her, we're going to be producing a documentary and this podcast forever because Tim Ballard needs to be stopped, and we're inspired by their bravery and stuff. And I don't think for a second she would like fault you or anyone who didn't know better, because she didn't know better. You were caught up in the same system that she was, caught up within. So anyway, quote, it says,
I still feel a responsibility to try and undo the harm that he's caused as somebody that platformed him. And I hope that others that are in my position that supported and platformed him also will come forward. There's a lot of harm we got to undo. So I bear some responsibility in that. And I can't undo all of it. But I can try and undo as much as I can. So I'm pulling for you, Kira. I'm sorry I built him up to your parents and your family. But I'm trying to undo that. And it's going to be a long road, but we're making progress. This New York Times article is huge progress.
Yeah. Thanks, Ryan. It says they were thrilled. Miss Lynch said they just really thought he was a spiritual giant. Many of the women described in lawsuits and interviews similar initial interactions with Mr. Ballard. Then, once he won the women's initial interest, they said he began talking graphically about sexual scenarios they might encounter based on his past experiences. Quote, "How far would you go to save a child?" he asked many of them. Yep, that's something we hear over and over again. How far would you go to save a child? And also, you don't get to dictate with your worldview, like the right, like rescue that a child in Colombia or Haiti needs to have. I get to dictate that. So if you're willing to go with me and save a child, that's it. End of story. You're going to save a child. You're going to go as far as humanly possible. I'm willing to go to death. I don't know about you. If you're only willing to go to, I don't know, me sexually assaulting you, not quite as far as me, Tim Ballard. So how far would you go to save a child? Said that to many of them. In text messages with one woman filed as part of a lawsuit, Mr. Ballard asked about increasingly personal topics, pubic hair waxing. Tim Ballard likes the Brazilian wax, we find out. What makes her feel sexy, what her face looks like during an orgasm. He has said such messages were sent as part of his undercover persona. Does anyone believe that? I'm begging, if anyone is in the Tim Ballard camp and they're hate watching that. Tim Ballard in his documentary on Last Sensations channel, in reference to all these messages, if you look at the evidence of all these things that's stated here, and Tim Ballard gets on camera and he says, that was my persona as Brian Black. I had to say these things so we could dirty up the phones, even though the phones, the evidence shows that those are not like the phones they use. That's his personal phone. It says, okay. So we know it's his personal phone, these text messages back and forth with Kira, Celeste, the list goes on. Does anyone in the Tim Ballard camp truly believe that these were part of his undercover persona?
Some of the women said they felt increasingly uneasy when he insisted it was necessary to keep up the ruse of the fake romance, even when they were alone in his office or in hotel rooms or vehicles. But Mr. Ballard warned them that sex traffickers had extensive networks and could be monitoring their every move, looking for any signals that their couple act might not be genuine. In that case, he warned they risked being killed or their efforts to save children might be undermined. Secrecy was paramount. Many of the women recalled being told that not even their families or their co-workers at the nonprofit were to know the details of the operations. Things quickly turned physical. Several of the women said, one of them, Mary Hall, said that in both an interview and court records that she met Mr. Ballard in his office early on, and he began groping her, kissing her stomach and tugging at the waistline of her pants, before being interrupted by the entrance of another executive. She initially thought it was a test of her ability to endure intimate situations, but she later expressed concern about Mr. Ballard to others in the organization and was not invited to proceed on a mission. That was her audition for missions. I told in a different podcast about a friend of mine who I just actually ran into the grocery store today before coming here, who told a similar story about auditioning at the Grand America Hotel that involved intimate interactions as audition. And the question, I'm sure Tim defends that, is like, well, I need to see if they'll be able to act the part of my girlfriend on these operations, because if they balk at my advances, then they'll blow our cover. But the only way to find that out is to put them on the spot and make sexual advances on them and see if they play along. And so that's the process for choosing your operative. I know that's his defense, but it's just disgusting because it's a perfect tool and a perfect scenario if you are actually trying to groom somebody. That's the way I see it.
Yeah, 100%.
Another woman, Sashlea Hightower, said in an interview and in court papers that she tensed up when Mr. Ballard began rubbing her inner thigh and nuzzling her neck, not long after she discussed her history as a rape survivor.
Please, everyone, go back and watch my video about Sasha, where I completely break down and dismantle Tim Ballard's smears of her as being an accomplice to sex trafficking, because she put all these things in the lawsuit about what she experienced with him. So there's just an asterisk on that, he's like, oh, you're a rape survivor? You'd be great at, speaking on behalf of OUR. And she thought she could do so much good for people who have experienced things similar to what she has experienced. And so sad and devastating that she was very, very, triggered to the highest degree and assaulted and not protected by Tim. And all while she thought that being a rape survivor would be, a benefit to the cause. It was something for Tim to manipulate. And also ended up just with really, really traumatic, devastating results. So our heart goes out to Sasha. In the situation felt weird, she said, but she was an actress, not an undercover operative. She assumed, based on Mr. Ballard's reputation, that this was part of the professional process. He knows what he's doing, she told herself. He's assured me this is all normal. He's got other people backing him up about this couple's ruse thing. Yeah, it's all part of the cornucopia of lies.
And apparently one of those people backing him up is Elder Russell M. Ballard.
Mm-hmm.
Sadly.
M. Russell Ballard, not to correct you.
Russell Ballard. Right. I would like to know if that's true. Please, anybody in the church that has information that could verify or deny that, let's figure this out. Okay. Successes and concerns. Mr. Ballard has claimed that thousands of trafficking victims were rescued over the years, though most of the women who spoke with the Times said they had not seen anyone rescued. That's a huge statement. Most of the women, we're talking 10 plus women, had not seen anyone rescued. And these are the couples ruse operators on the front line on these operations.
Yeah.
I mean, that's so huge.
Anyone rescued.
Allies of Mr. Ballard said that pretending to be a couple during the operations had proven to be effective. Alex Acosta, who began working with Mr. Ballard in 2021, focusing mostly on Latin America, said that in his experience, the team would discuss strategy beforehand. He said that relationships between Mr. Ballard and the women on the team always appeared to be kept within professional boundaries. Quote, every time I saw this enacted, there was a clear line and it was never crossed, unquote, he said. He added that in his 2 years at the organization, he saw well over 100 sex trafficking victims rescued.
So much of like an asterisk and a nuance on that, because it's like 100 sex trafficking victims rescued. What was OUR's involvement in that? You know, you've mentioned before, Ryan, that there's reports that if OUR pays for the dog food for some police out there, that they get to count whatever rescues that department does, so what are you counting? And were they actually in sex, like they were already sex trafficked, they were in these horrible abusive networks, that was already there, and then OUR came in and rescued them out of it? Or there's a lot of nuance to that statement of what we're claiming here. So they haven't provided any proof. I've not seen a single legitimate victim of sex trafficking come forward and say, OUR and Tim Ballard saved us from this living hell that we were in. So I believe you that there are absolutely people who are sold into sex slavery from all ages. I haven't seen that Tim Ballard, as he's amassed these millions of dollars and all this credibility, that he has done anything to curb this, horrific industry. And then the second point I just wanted to make was that there's two things going on here, like as we read in the lawsuit with Sasha Hightower, who was just mentioned. So not only are we saying, yes, there were lines that were absolutely crossed by Tim, where he is doing things way above kissing and touching private areas, but the other side of that is Tim not protecting these women in the brothels, in these sex parlors and things, putting them in very dangerous situations. One, that they're not trained to, as actresses or hairdressers, they're not trained to know what to do. And second of all, that there are actual like sex workers and possibly the sex traffickers themselves that they're trying to catch, who are assaulting these women and them saying the safety words and trying to get them to stop. And Tim Ballard, time and time again, it sounds like, not doing anything to stop this and actually help these women from possibly being raped and penetrated or assaulted, or up to like them fearing for their lives to be killed by other people in these dangerous situations. So those are two things to consider, that, if Tim Ballard's allies are saying, we didn't see any of this, the evidence basically shows that Tim has crossed those lines and also put them in harm's way time and time again.
Yeah, and let me add to that. He said that he saw well over 100 sex trafficking victims rescued. Well, we know from the Cartagena raid that they claimed to save 50 kids on a different podcast, or a speech Tim claimed to save like over 100 or something. Let's go with the smaller number, 50 kids. Even if there was 50 kids saved in that one, we can show, and we're going to show in the next video, how through the evidence presented at the court in the Kelly Suarez case, that those kids, most of them actually were over 18, the vast majority of them. The other ones were above the age of consent, 14 to 17. Those kids and those people had never been in human trafficking. They were not trafficked there, unless you count being brought there by OUR, but they came there on their own volition. They were not being controlled, and they were not enslaved by anybody. And subsequently, they were all released back into their communities because they weren't actually trafficked in the first place. So that right there is like at least 50, maybe a lot more, of kids that OUR claimed were saved that weren't actually saved. It just, 100 sex trafficking victims rescued. We need more context. All right. You want to continue, Kara?
Yeah.
Victor
Hugo Enriquez Garcia, a Secretary of Public Safety for the Mexican state of Sonora, said Mr. Ballard proved adept at collecting information about trafficking venues and then shared that information with law enforcement. His tips sometimes led to arrests of pedophiles operating in Mexico and the rescue of minors, he said. Mr. Garcia said the allegations against Mr. Ballard rang untrue to him. He found Mr. Ballard to be professional and never witnessed any inappropriate behavior. Maybe because he wasn't a hairdresser. Maybe because
maybe wasn't super hot.
Maybe he wasn't super hot, and I don't know. Maybe he wasn't privy to what was going on inside these sex parlors. Maybe he has a stack of cash that he's sitting on, and I don't know. But they're sharing the other side. That's fine. The records show there were internal concerns about some of the conduct at the nonprofit's operations, and not just Mr. Ballard's. Dun dun dun. Looking kind of old there. Looking kind of old. Okay.
Yeah. So I don't know. I shouldn't probably comment on this, but that's a look to me of somebody that binged the night before. The bloated face of alcoholism.
His eyes are a little red. No, I think his face isn't as red as normal. I can tell he's wearing caked on makeup, and he's got chapped lips, and he's wearing some like Vaseline around his lips there. So maybe it's stained from the lipstick from the prostitutes that he was kissing. I don't know. Okay.
Now there's a whole discussion in the comment threads about some of the pictures where he just almost looks like a different person, like something going on. People are suggesting steroid overuse and all sorts of other drugs and maybe alcoholism and stuff, because he looks so different from picture to picture. It's kind of bizarre. It's almost, some people say it's almost unrecognizable. So I don't know what's going on there, but there's something going on there. But I digress.
Right. All right. I'll keep reading. Investigators in Utah reported reviewing undercover video of an operation nearly a decade ago in Cabo San Lucas that included Paul Hutchinson, a businessman from Utah who was an important investor in Sound of Freedom. Ooh, Paul Hutchinson, we got a lot to say about this man.
He was listed as an investor in the Sound of Freedom movie. That OUR
asterisks on that. We have future episodes on that.
Yeah.
What does it mean to be an investor at OUR, or an investor in the Sound of Freedom movie? And what does it mean when OUR has millions and millions of dollars and they want to promote their cause and do all this myth making for Tim Ballard's narratives about what a badass, awesome guy he is? All of this money from a nonprofit possibly funneling into for-profit ventures, and Paul Hutchinson being a skeezy guy at the center of it. So money and sexually. So we have some bombshell stuff coming out. I don't know, probably after the trial. But for now, this is what we have video evidence of. On video, what I'm about to read. On that operation, a man presented Mr. Hutchinson's team with a girl who someone on the video described as 16 years old. Mr. Hutchinson approached the girl and put both his hands on her bare breasts, according to a law enforcement summary of the video. So again, this is like filmed for their TV show. People said, can you get rid of that? There's, voice recordings like, can you get rid of that video? And then it getting out and into the hands of law enforcement. The operation team members could later be heard discussing the girl's age, seeming to agree that she was a minor, although Mr. Hutchinson now says he believes she was an adult. How convenient. Melissa Cannon Johnson, who worked in the film industry and was later invited to follow the organization on a trip to Haiti, recalled phoning Mr. Ballard to express concern that a team member had behaved inappropriately around her and children at an orphanage. In a sworn court statement, Miss Johnson said she was surprised when Mr. Ballard quickly guessed that Mr. Hutchinson was the person she was talking about. Take a second to think about that. You run an anti-sex trafficking organization. You are the guy who liberates people from the worst hells imaginable, from sexual exploitation. And on your team, your investors, one of your right-hand men, is somebody who has a history that's been reported to you so often about their, let's just say, inappropriate sexual proclivities and harassment at your organization and outside of it. You got to pick one. Is it about saving exploited women and children, or is it about something completely differently? And I think just by Tim Ballard keeping Paul Hutchinson around and actually sending him on, how many is reported to us? I think 40 operations that Paul Hutchinson went on as like the wealthy American. How many times does it have to be reported to Tim Ballard that this man is like, bare minimum a pervert who enjoys, let's just say enjoys doing the type of job that supposedly is supposed to be so disgusting and heart-wrenching for these men to have to be involved in these sex parlors and strip clubs and stuff. And but maybe some of them actually enjoy it. Let's put it that way. So I know those are some kind of big statements, but I think that this is backed up here by Melissa Johnson's statement about a sworn court statement that she saw some inappropriate actions at an orphanage. So what's it really all about, Tim Ballard? What are you really all after? Quote, Ballard explained that Paul was sexually disturbed. Why are you saying that, Tim, when you run an anti-sex trafficking organization? And that everyone at OUR knew that. She wrote in her statement, Ballard told me he had to put up with Hutchinson because of his wealth and because Paul could use his influence. Yes, okay. Mr. Hutchinson has since founded the Child Liberation Foundation, a new organization to conduct rescue missions.
Oh man, New York Times just promoted his new Child Liberation Foundation. Free advertisement in the New York Times. He's probably so happy about that.
Yep. I don't have a lot of as much inside knowledge as you do, Ryan, but I do have a close friend of Paul Hutchinson's who has given me some documentation and has sat with me for hours and told me about Paul basically started this Child Liberation Foundation because what's better than a nonprofit where you go out and be the hero to save sex trafficked kids? Nobody's gonna, limit the amount of zeros they put on that check when they write it to you. It's the perfect nonprofit. It's the perfect place to funnel money into and turn it into for-profits things for yourself. So unfortunately, they have capitalized on a real thing that does need to be solved in the world, but pulling on the heartstrings of people. So I am very sad to report that Tim Ballard basically had a proof of concept with OUR, and Paul Hutchinson, took the reins and started his own one.
I have a question that I don't know the answer to that just came to mind. Was Paul Hutchinson ousted at the same time as Tim? Was he part of that purge as a result of the internal investigation?
No, Paul Hutchinson. I'm thinking on my feet. Paul Hutchinson left, I believe it would be 2019 after the whiteboard meeting.
Okay, so a little bit before that. Earlier.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, in a video statement responding to the incident in which he was seen touching the girl's breast, Mr. Hutchinson said it had been a dangerous undercover situation, that he made a split-second decision to touch the girl to make it appear real. Again, I just want to lay out for you, if you're in a situation where you need to assault somebody, you need to touch what you would assume is a person in sex trafficking to get them out of that situation. Maybe the structure of your organization is not all that great, and there should probably be some analysis on how these tactics are going if you have to assault them to save them. Just think into that. And you know what, this is the one thing that's on camera. It's probably happened dozens of times, because I would guess that is a real thing, that a sex trafficker is going to say, hey, I need to see you do something with this woman right now, because if you're undercover, then you wouldn't do it. So to prove you're not undercover, here's my child sex slave. Assault them as you wish. I would guess that would be a major part of like how things would go. So probably there's going to be better ways to actually get these kids out of this situation than what OUR has purported works. You know what I mean?
Well,
So,
you know what I just realized? Where was
it didn't
the
work.
couple's ruse partner when this was going on? Isn't that the very situation the woman is supposed to step in to
Right on.
prevent? Right?
If she's in the bathroom for a second, then you're in
Oh,
trouble.
man.
Like,
Yeah, maybe she was tying her shoe, or maybe she wasn't paying
Mhm.
attention. I don't know. Where's the couple's ruse partner? That's exactly
Mhm.
what that was supposed to prevent. But
Just say that you're more of an ass man, and when she turns around, you run out the door. So he strongly denied that anything improper happened at the orphanage in Haiti. So much to say there. I had a team of operators around me every day of that mission. I never once acted inappropriately with anybody, he said in an emailed statement. Logically speaking, Ryan and audience, remember how Tim Ballard's like other like ally and like his lawyers will be like, we were around Tim Ballard. We never saw him do anything inappropriate. And he was surrounded by people, and they had these clear restrictions. They always want to say these lists of things that make it like no improprieties could possibly have happened. Flash forward to one of the people that are around Tim Ballard is Paul Hutchinson. Paul Hutchinson is saying the people around me at the orphanage are all say like, they just said I didn't act inappropriately. I'm just saying maybe the circles you guys run in, things happen and are inappropriate. And if Tim Ballard, as the CEO of this organization, doesn't even kick out Paul Hutchinson, what are the chances that Paul Hutchinson is going to have his own lackeys around as he gets away with assaulting and doing all kinds of things? Saying that there's people around doesn't really like quell my suspicions that you guys are a bunch of rapists. In interviews and statements filed in court, the women said that once recruited, they found themselves accompanying Mr. Ballard to strip clubs, massage parlors, and other sex work hotspots looking for underage purveyors, sometimes locally in Utah, other times in places like London, Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, Guayaquil, and Ecuador. They said they went along with what they were being asked to do despite growing reservations, telling themselves that they needed to trust Mr. Ballard if they were to succeed in freeing the children who were trapped there.
some of the women now say they became concerned that many of the meetings they were having with sex workers focused less on gathering information, building trust with the workers, and more on letting sexual encounters evolve. One of the women, Celeste Boris, filed a lawsuit against Mr. Ballard and Operation Underground Railroad, accusing them of sexual assault and battery, fraud, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and other claims. She said she had been working at an office job at the nonprofit when Mr. Ballard approached her to say he had experienced a vision about her and proposed expanding her role. Footnote that vision. I mean, there's hours and hours we could talk about what that looked like and who is behind that, and the visions of glory.
Yeah.
Character Tom Harrison that was influencing Tim at this time, working off of visions. That seems like it needs a whole nother explanation. We'll get there. We've talked about it a little bit. We'll keep going. But on what she was told would be something like an introductory operation in Ecuador in 2022, She said Mr. Ballard surprised her with a couple's massage with him in a hotel room. Two girls who looked to Miss Boris to be about 15 or 16 entered the room, and Mr. Ballard got naked and lay on the bed. She said Miss Boris lay down with her clothes on, and he asked why she had not stripped down.
Trigger warning as we get into this part, by the way, everyone. This is really graphic stuff.
This is disturbing. I know. I saw somebody write in there, like, I feel like I need to take a shower, and I feel the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you take it from here, Kara?
Okay. Celeste, we love you. If you're watching, I've also met and really love advocating on behalf of Celeste, his former executive assistant. And there's all kinds of
rock star.
Absolute
epitome of courage.
Yeah.
For coming forward with this. This is so vulnerable and so revealing. It's like the worst part about your whole life. And she's putting it out there for the entire world to see. Like, nobody wants to go through that.
You could be conned and manipulated and yeah, like that.
But she feels so passionate that he needs to be stopped, she's willing to put that on the sacrificial altar to make this go forward. And so it's just so disgusting when Tim comes forward saying she wants money. I mean, it's just so disgusting, especially once you hear what's happened to her.
Yeah. So when people just want to dismiss this of some women, who want money, okay, deep state. No, we're talking about his executive assistant who has the Utah County Crime Lab has evidence of her, who's on the screen right now, her skirt. I've met her. She had a skirt. Tim Ballard assaulted her. There's about to read more about her assault. How did his semen end up on her skirt if he never crossed any lines? So who better than his executive assistant to basically turn on him and say, I believed in this tactic at one time, but now I have to stop him from doing this and conning people.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing person.
Okay. So instead of working to help the girls, Miss Boris said Mr. Ballard began talking about masturbation. So they are in a hotel room. He brings in some sounds like underage sex workers for a massage. She's half naked on the bed. Tim Ballard's half naked on the bed getting a massage. And he starts the conversation about masturbation. I don't know why, if you think that you're going to get sex traffickers' number and you're going to stop this, why the following needs to happen. Of all the topics you can bring up, masturbating my quote unquote girlfriend right here is probably not the best way to save kids. But again, Ryan, don't you know what Tim says? That how dare us dictate how to save a child? Of course.
I know. How dare us? How dare us be disgusted and feel like we need to take a shower after hearing what he's doing?
One of the girls proposed demonstrating her methods on Miss Boris. Mr. Ballard rolled Miss Boris on her back and started removing her shorts. So he is forcing her to now be assaulted. Like I said, not only is Tim Ballard crossing the lines that he said never were crossed, he's also putting these couples or his partners in positions where he's not only not protecting them from assaults by sex traffickers, but he's also rolling them over and taking off their pants so they can be assaulted by sex traffickers. Okay. Mr. Ballard rolled Miss Boris on her back and started removing her shorts. Realizing what was about to happen, she said she closed her eyes to try to escape. She said she heard him commenting that he had never watched what was transpiring in such close proximity before, and at one point penetrated her with his fingers, describing watching these underage massage parlor sex workers masturbate his executive assistant in a hotel room with no one else around, because that's how we save sex trafficked kids. Anyone else just need to get some an iron knuckles going on right now? I don't think so, Tim. Don't think so. Celeste, so sorry that happened, and we love you. My God. So Miss Boris eventually escaped to the bathroom, taking refuge in the shower where she sobbed. Mr. Ballard later came in, she said, claiming that he had obtained valuable information from the girls. Quote, "We're going to save so many children," he later told her. It also reports in the lawsuit that there's no follow-up. She never saw anything come of that, any other connections, any other kids come of that. So
And you see, this is the grooming operation that he's running. He probably recognized that she was traumatized from this experience, that it was not something she wanted, and finding her in the shower crying, where did he go? Deflect to the bigger cause. Don't worry about this. We are going to save so many children, he told her.
Yeah.
Don't
Exactly.
look at what we did or what I put you through. Focus on, we're going to save kids. Stay on that. Stay on message. Keep your view there, and then forget about any other reservations you have. I'm sure that there's many people that are watching that are victims of sexual assault also, and can see this tactic and have experienced similar grooming tactics and cover-up tactics by their abusers as well. It's almost textbook in a lot of ways. And I'm so sorry.
Well said.
I'm so sorry that happened.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing to say as well. Like you started at the beginning of, he's probably seeing how upset this is making her, and he's seeing the trauma between her and Sasha and Celeste and the other women. These women going out into the cars and stuff, having full-blown panic attacks. He's used that to his advantage by saying, well, sometimes these are so traumatic that we sleep in the same bed together, is what's been reported, right? So like, he's not interested in curtailing the trauma that he inflicts on the couple's ruse partners, that he takes out on these operations. He's not concerned with actually saving the kids and following up and getting any numbers and stuff. This seems to be about something completely different for Tim Ballard, and the trauma and the wasted money and what he puts these women through. That is not of his concern whatsoever. So it's obvious that these manipulation tactics and deflections of all the things that he said about, well, how far would you go to save the kids? And like, how dare you dictate with your worldview what kind of rescue a kid needs? These are all obviously, to me, just clear deflections from somebody who doesn't know the first thing about ending sexual exploitation. He is just a promoter of it, So that's the only thing he really knows, is how to inflict the trauma, but not how to solve it. So 2 months later, the team was at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Mexico City, and Miss Boris found Mr. Ballard with a professional escort in the hotel room they shared. Okay, the escort's bathing suit was on the floor, she related in her lawsuit. Miss Boris said the woman chatting with her via a translation app before departing told her that she had sex with Mr. Ballard. The escort says, yes, I had sex with him. Miss Boris provided the Times with a photo of herself and the escort. Mr. Ballard insisted that it had not gone that far, but acknowledged some sexual activity. Interesting. Okay. Miss Boris said when she objected to his actions, she said he began screaming and cursing. He goes, "This is what I get for saving effing kids? You're criticizing me on how I effing save kids?" Again, it's like the clip I just showed you. It's like, you're going to criticize me for how I sleep with escorts to save kids? Put it all in context, Tim. Like, you're going to criticize me for how I masturbate and dominate and rape my executive assistant because it saves kids and gets sex traffickers' numbers. Do you guys hear how stupid he is right now? Like, that's what he's literally saying. Like, I do this thing to save kids. What's the X? What's the variable? What's the insert here of what we're talking about? But as long as it ends with saving kids, he thinks that you can erase the first part of it. No. Miss Boris said, she said,
let me add one more thing, Kara, if I could. I've been the recipient of Tim's anger, his angry rants, and he's been, if you see him in his rallies and his speeches, he musters this passion, and he's very loud and very charismatic and very passionate. That same kind of passion and charisma and loudness, when it turns to anger, it is the most vile, vitriol anger that he makes you feel that he's about to rip your head off. I've been the recipient of that. I know I have several friends that have been the recipient of that, and it is so overwhelming and loud that it's scary. It causes people to back down, and it's like the ultimate form of gaslighting behind this angry, vicious rant. I mean, I don't know what Celeste is describing, his reaction when she challenges on that. I can picture that. I actually hear Tim's voice when I hear what she's saying. He said
Mhm.
it sounds like everything that I've experienced and other people have.
Mhm.
It's very, very intimidating. Let me put it that way.
Yeah. Oh, I was doing the voice, but you have it in your head. You've experienced it too.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to experience that. I don't want to be thinking about this, but people need
Mhm.
to know.
Oh
So
man.
here we
Yeah,
are.
thanks for adding that. All right. So she said she began wishing that she could take back her remarks, wondering why she had questioned his methods. Oh, Celeste, we love you.
Gaslighting. Yeah.
Ugh, yeah. Miss Boris said Mr. Ballard's intimate interactions with sex workers continued, including at a luxury hotel in Pasadena, California, where she recalled walking into a room to find a woman hired for the day giving Mr. Ballard oral sex. Interesting. And just a quick side note, like it said that the Times has uh, evidence that Celeste Boris has provided to them to verify these claims. The fact checking that's gone along with this article, as I've understood it, just from you being interviewed and the small things that you had to say, Ryan, like you can attest that Mike Baker writing this article for the New York Times, he fact checked every line you said to like the millionth degree, right? So if they're
Yeah.
saying these certain, like, I feel like they're not going to put anything in these lines unless they have some verifiable evidence that they have seen to actually indicate this. So I'm wondering, if Celeste has shown possibly, the text messages of like, hey, Tim, you having oral sex with that person was really not cool. And him going, yeah, sorry, it won't happen again. I absolutely had oral sex with them and I shouldn't do it again. Or like, don't tell me how to save sex trafficked kids this way. Like, I don't know, but maybe there's evidence of it. So, all right. Do you want to take over reading
And
on
well,
this
let me
part?
give you a little bit of
Yeah, go ahead.
background on this also, just to support your point. I had a lunch with Mike Baker and a friend of mine that I introduced him to, who was part high up in OUR for a number of years. And she's a personal friend of mine, an amazing, awesome person who didn't want to come forward with her name and, receive the vicious smears that would accompany coming forward. And I totally understand that. Um, that's totally fine. But she, over 3 hours, was able to corroborate all of these other stories that Mike Baker had been told as an OUR insider. And she's not quoted in this article, and there's no credit given to her, but I want to give credit to her because she came forward and she, off the record or on the record, but anonymously, corroborated a lot of these stories and a lot of these facts as an OUR insider. And so there's people like that contributed this, that went through the vetting process of all the facts and all of the claims made in this article. And it was very thorough, and it took very long. And there was a lot of follow-ups, and there was a lot of conversations about even the meaning and finding the best words to describe certain situations and things like that. So that's what we're dealing with the New York Times, a professional job. And I want to say thank you to all the people that I know that came forward and contributed their knowledge to this so that Mike Baker could verify these claims and corroborate it with multiple testimonies. And that's what happened.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for being here.
Okay.
And thank you to everyone who made this article possible. Okay.
All right. Do
All
you
right.
want me to take over?
I'll continue reading because
All right.
I love it. Miss Boris said Mr. Ballard not only placed her in inappropriate situations with sex workers, but himself engaged in unwelcome sexual acts with her on at least 24 occasions, sometimes when they were alone and not conducting any operation. On one such occasion, she said Mr. Ballard warning that traffickers might be watching through a hotel window, pushed her onto a bed, and despite her objections, penetrated her until she was able to use enough strength to push him away. For months, Miss Boris said she was confused about how to think about Mr. Ballard's conduct because over time it began feeling like a routine part of the job. She initially defended Mr. Ballard as concerns about his behavior began to percolate at the nonprofit and he resigned. Asterisks on resigned, forced out. Quote, I have never been taken advantage of, end quote. She wrote in an email that Mr. Ballard has filed as an exhibit in court. It was sent to Mr. Ballard and an executive of the organization and addressed to whom it may concern. In fact, she said she was already having doubts about him and wrote the email because Mr. Ballard had pressured her to do so. No way. Yeah, I can see that. She was beginning to distance herself from him, she said, and asking herself hard questions. Quote, I believed it. I believed it worked. I believed Tim. I believed the mission. I literally was in a cult, she said. Yeah. I just don't think people understand. Back when I was reporting on this almost a year ago now, and podcasts and pro-Mormon LDS podcasts and stuff couldn't believe that the church had denounced Tim Ballard like this for morally unacceptable behavior and stuff. And I had already talked to some insiders back in, I believe, October. And I was like, you guys just wait and see. Like, you cannot grasp. It's a bunch of guys, a bunch of Mormon bros kind of sitting around talking. Like, what if I told you that he said that blowjobs were a part of, saving sex trafficked kids? And none of them could possibly believe that Tim Ballard could be capable of such evil and like horrible things. Cardinellis is on his podcast saying, no way, like you wouldn't even be able to like walk out of your house. You'd be the most evil human on earth. And I was like, you guys just aren't thinking big enough about what all of these, the credibility and spiritual manipulation all combined can actually do to a person. So when Celeste is here saying like, I was in a cult, it's very hard for other people who are in cult-like structures, say like the Mormon church or, the type of communities that Tim Ballard has gotten his credibility within. If you're in a cult-like structure, it might be kind of hard to see other cult-like structures and recognize that. So, my heart absolutely goes out to Celeste and people who he's manipulated into these situations, because I can absolutely see what she's saying about, like, you really believe. And then on top of all of that, like, there's like almost like a sunken cost fallacy, or like, like when he's reversing and victim blaming that like, this operation, of course it has to go forward. Of course, this Tim Ballard, how could I, if I'm doubting him, there must be something wrong with me. It's not his tactics. And so, allowing these things to just like kind of progress and stuff because you've been so groomed and manipulated. Like, again, yes, it is. It's just so textbook. And I just, from the very beginning, from a year ago, I'm like, are people not thinking big enough? I was like, do you guys not know how this entire thing, that's just how monsters get access to victims in the first place. So my heart really goes out to Celeste, but people within cults just can't quite see it when the writing's on the wall.
Celeste identifies here that she was part of a cult, the cult of Tim Ballard. And I talked with a friend of mine who works with law enforcement agencies that has criminal psychologists. She also knows and worked with Tim, and she advised us that we really need to be looking at this under the purview of a cult, not a nonprofit, not a religious organization, but specifically a cult with a cult leader. And once you understand with church endorsement and all the people in the community and all around Tim that are all supporting him up, building him up, and idolizing him, that's how he became a cult member. And this idolization and all this power and money's coming in, and people are asking him to speak everywhere. And he's Deseret Books #1 author. He's got the endorsement of Elder Ballard. He became a cult figure, a prophet to his community. And he is actually claiming to be the prophet, claiming to be a prophet of the American Covenant. He said that countless times in front of me, in front of multiple people that we were around at his rallies. Maybe not that explicitly, but in all of his actions and doing, he's saying that he's doing God's work. He's being led by God to do these things. And so you got to look at him from the perspective of a cult leader. And it was just touched on in Celeste's comments on here, but that's really what needs to happen, because the manipulation and grooming tactics that were happening were not just on a personal level, they're on a spiritual level and a psychological level, where this cult member who spoke for God now has control over your mind in a way where he can dictate what you think, whether you believe what he's doing is right or wrong, and twisting and turning everything into opposite town. That's how she described Tim Ballard to me, that criminal psychologists can easily break this down, break down all of the things he is doing. And that's all evidenced in the texts that he's been sending to these women, invoking things that he's received revelation, that God told him this, that they were married in a previous life, that God chose that woman to be his ruse partner for specific reasons, exalting them, using spiritual manipulation to get them in a mind frame where he could have control. That's what cult leaders do. And so I mean, we could talk about that for a long time, but I just want to point that out, of what Celeste and pointed out in this, that she was part of this cult. And that's tragic, but that's the truth.
Yeah, exactly. Well said. And people are still believing Tim Ballard. Just listen to the things I just said and Ryan just said, and with that entire cacophony, tell me what we got wrong. If we're wrong, tell us what we got wrong, and that a man that's amassed that much power and influence did it. And some other people, absolute power corrupts absolutely, but tell me why with Tim Ballard it didn't. So then she goes on to say, I did remember thinking throughout my time with him, like, why am I feeling sorry for myself? Like, I come home at night, people who are victims or trafficked, they don't get to come home at night. Wow. Again, these people, they were in this not for the millions of dollars, but because they believed in the cause of ending sex trafficking. And they were manipulated so far as to say, like, they would do anything to save the kids. So that's heartbreaking that is what was running through her mind after being assaulted so many times. Mark Eisenhut, a lawyer for Mr. Ballard, said Mr. Ballard did not harass or physically assault any of the women he worked with, nor did he have any inappropriate contact with sex workers. Of course he did. The women's claims against Mr. Ballard, he said, have been ever evolving and ever morphing, becoming more serious over time. Anything you want to say to that, Ryan?
Yeah, people are not afraid anymore of coming forward. That's why it's evolving. That's why it's ever morphing into a bigger and bigger problem.
And he goes on to say he has never been charged with a crime, and every court considering a complaint against Mr. Ballard so far has ruled in their favor. I think that's very misleading. Again, like we said at the beginning about why certain things have been dismissed and then needing to be refiled. And says he has never been charged with the crime. Not yet. Not yet. Also, we do have evidence. There's emails in the lawsuit from AG Sean Reyes, who was Tim Ballard's bestest pal. This is like proof if you ever needed proof of proof, dude. Like, imagine this. All the things you just said about him amassing power, that he's able to do all of these things. And then his bestest bud is the Attorney General of Utah. He's the third Attorney General who has been embroiled in a scandal, basically. So Utah does not have very non-corrupt Attorney Generals, historically speaking. But Sean Reyes, there's emails of him intimidating witnesses and intimidating these criminal investigations from going forward. So maybe he would have been charged with a crime, dear lawyer of Tim Ballard's, if he wasn't already busy doing so many other crimes with so many other corrupt people in the state of Utah, so that he couldn't be charged with the crimes that they were doing. You see what I'm saying? It's like he was just like totally watched this entire time by tons of people, and of course he just followed all of the rules. Paul Hutchinson, Sean Reyes. I'm just saying the circles you guys are running in aren't really voting that much confidence that he's not a crime committer, because a lot of them are already committing crimes. See what I mean? So, not been charged with a crime yet. Moving on, Mr. Ballard scored a legal victory in June when a judge dismissed Miss Ryder's claims of fraud and conspiracy related to the couple's ruse. The judge found that there were insufficient facts to prove that Mr. Ballard and other leaders of the organization had planned the ruse tactic as a ploy for sexual misconduct. Miss Ryder was not among those who alleged assault by Mr. Ballard. Bree Ryder, you might remember, is the one who her eye socket was punched in. And there's also a lawsuit filed and probably, I think, dismissed at this point, right, Ryan? For her being...
Yeah, it's going to be refiled, though.
Yeah. Other women besides Miss Boris said they also began having serious doubts. This is actually an interesting one. I don't think I'd heard this one as much. Like, I'm Krista Casey's case. So this was actually news to me, and very few things have been news to me over the last year. What about you, Ryan?
Yeah, this is interesting.
Okay. Krista Casey, a hair and makeup artist who initially met Mr. Ballard on a film set and later went with him on international operations, joined several other women in a lawsuit over her experience with the organization. Because she was not at that initial press conference where the women read like those statements. That's pretty much the only time the women have been like on camera or speaking. That was about a year ago, and she was not at that press conference. So this is kind of her first time coming forward publicly with her name and her face. So this is interesting. She says she described in her suit and in an interview a mission in the Dominican Republic in March 2022. There, the two of them stayed at a dedicated sex house, and Mr. Ballard brought in 2 sex workers to the room they were sharing. What ensued was a night that Miss Casey describes as, quote, horribly traumatic. For hours, she said, they were physically interacting with the sex workers, touching and groping without technically having sex, with no apparent progress in gaining information about child victims. Afterward, she recalled Mr. Ballard bragged that they had managed to have what amounted to an orgy without engaging in full sex, a claim she knew was only technically true. After that, she made a decision to avoid working with Mr. Ballard on undercover operations. It became very clear to me that we were not getting intel, Ms. Casey said. There was no clear purpose. Okay, so it goes on to say, Ms. Lynch, the Salt Lake City hairdresser, said she grew wary about Mr. Ballard after his escalating physical touches and a night spent at a local strip club where he asked her to give him a lap dance, all in the name of practicing for missions. Gotta practice for the missions. Gotta have chemistry. What does your butt look like when it's wiggling in my face? For kids. Gotta know how your boobs look when they're bouncing so that I know where the sex trafficked kids will be. I don't know how it connects. Tim Ballard does, though. She said she had been working for several months with Mr. Ballard, whom she considered a close friend, when he began displaying increasingly erratic behavior. Okay, we're going to get into the part here about Kira's rape. So trigger warning, my dear lovelies out there in the comment section and listening at home. Okay. Then one night in January 2022, as she described in a court records, he came to her house to get his haircut and was acting particularly disconnected. He told her that he believed the two of them had been married in another life, she said, and he started to pull her clothes off. So again, this goes back to like the spiritual wifery stuff.
Tom Harrison.
The second I add you, you just go, Tom Harrison.
Oh, really?
Right on cue.
Like, right that could happen like at any point in this entire article, and it actually makes sense and works. You just jump in. We'll
get into the depressing part about the rape first, but I'm sorry, that was just a funny moment of like any point in this article, if I just shout out Tom Harrison, it will fit in because as we are dedicating our life to this podcast, the spiritual advisor of Lori and Chad Daybell and Tim Ballard, they have somebody in common, Tom Harrison. So Visions of Glory, Tom Harrison, spiritual wifery. This is where it gets extra sick and twisted with the manipulations of seeing into the spirit world and a lot of Mormon theology and different kooky stuff, all still be like shoehorned straight into our 21st century to still manipulate and groom and assault women. So, Ryan, do you want to go ahead and read this part?
Yeah, where'd you leave off?
He told her that they'd been married in another life.
You believe the two of them had been married in another life, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's on my screen.
And he started to pull, her clothes off. She repeatedly told him to stop and tried to escape his grasp, she said, but he pinned her on the stairs and forced himself on her. I'm so sorry that happened. I don't know. I don't know what more to say. It's absolutely disgusting, especially seeing that he would use spiritual manipulation prior to forcing himself on a woman.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like
Mm-hmm.
that's just absolutely disgusting behavior. I don't know. It's hopefully she's in a place where she can find healing and support, because nobody wants to go through that. Mr. Ballard, through a lawyer, has said that no such assault occurred, instead contending that Miss Lynch had made advances to him. Miss Lynch's initial request for a protective order to keep Mr. Ballard away from her was dismissed by a judge who referred to the case as a colossal he said, she said, and noted that Miss Lynch had made some inconsistent statements. This pisses me off because there is one party, Miss Lynch, that is scared for her life, for her safety, living in the community with this guy who she alleged raped her. And the judge is like, well, it's he said, she said. I'm not going to grant a protective order because of inconsistencies in your statement. I mean, that's how we're, seriously, after the Me Too movement, that's how we're viewing victims of sexual assault. That's how we're going to treat them. Seriously?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's almost unbelievable to me, and it pisses me off that that's the situation.
Mm-hmm.
I don't
Yeah,
know.
especially as a judge. Like, so that's what the judge says. So just last week, I think Kira went in for her protective order that was not granted. That's part of what this is referencing here, where it says, then Kira basically is like, okay, victims don't always initially report everything that's happened to them, and that it would take an evidentiary hearing to fully determine the facts. And so, if you want to put things in context, she's already afraid to come forward with him at all. If she drops the rape allegation, is because it goes from basically the inconsistent statements, if you want me to spell it out for you, goes from just like a more ambiguous assault that's alleged in the statements of the lawsuit to, okay, here enough women have come forward, enough support has been behind Kira. This is my perspective, at least. And that then she's able to finally actually say what has happened, probably after enough like grieving and processing and therapy, all kinds of stuff, to actually put this out into the public. Because if you're going to come out with a rape allegation against Tim Ballard, that's as heavy of a hit as you can possibly get. But we have other documentation and other testimony from his executive assistant, Celeste Boris, also backing up that Tim, he's not such a good guy, and it's hard to believe that he wouldn't do something like this. So I absolutely support Kira in this, and it's unfortunate that the judge that was supposed to be granting her protective order just thought that, literally said to her in court, last week, Ryan, that said,
yeah, it was right before I left for Columbia.
Get a protective order because somebody raped you. You have to tell us every single detail about what they did to you. Day one, the second it happens, you got to come forward. To that, I just want to say, fuck you. Your turn, Ryan, on our very professional podcast.
And if that's not bad enough, it's really bad. It doesn't get any worse than that. But at the hearing, I just have to throw this out here because Tim is on doing his own podcast and stuff with his sidekick, Matt Cooper. That guy went with him to the hearing, and he winked at Kira while they're waiting for the judge. Like, just let that sink in. That's the kind of people that we're dealing with. That's like so disgusting. Like, come on. Like, what are you doing, man? What the hell are you doing? Seriously.
Yeah. Do you have no shame?
Yeah.
Here's a comment if you want to respond to this for a second. Why should a court grant an order without evidence that violates due process? Well, first of all, we don't know exactly what evidence was already shown to
Well,
the
yeah,
court
they
or if
needed to
it was
go into.
enough.
I think they were calling for an evidentiary hearing. I'm not a lawyer, but I understand where the evidence can be presented, but it got dismissed before they could even do that. I think that's what happened.
Yeah. Interesting. Yes. Yeah. I don't know what the threshold is of how much evidence you have to show someone to keep a perp away from them, but it's just unfortunate.
Like, she's just asking for protective order. She wanted the assurance that he wasn't going to show up at her house. She wanted the assurance that he wouldn't be around her kids.
Mm-hmm. They live in the same state, might I remind you guys.
I think their kids go to the same school. Like she is right there with the perpetrator in the same community, and she's just asking for assurance from law enforcement that she's not going to be victimized again, or harassed, or intimidated, or slandered like he did when in his fundraiser in the Eagle Mountain Stake, where he got the support of his bishop and stake president to hold a fundraiser for his legal fees. And once all the people signed up, went to the house, and was streamed online to a lot of others, what did he do? He smeared and berated Kira.
To the people in her stake, to the people in her community.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you go out there and you say such insane things like these people are, how there's sex traffickers out there. Well, these women, Kira, who lives down the block, naming her to the stake, saying they're the reason why we're not saving more sex trafficked kids.
They're working for the pedophiles.
What do you think a bunch of gun-toting Utah County people are going to be up to? So, yeah, absolutely insane. Okay.
Yeah.
So, okay.
This is not unbiased journalism. We like Kira. We think she's a rock star and amazing, and we're pissed off that somebody is doing this to them, and the state of Utah court system and law enforcement is not protecting the victims. I'm pissed off about that. There you go.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so jumping back into the story of the night of her rape, he's pinning her on the stairs. He said, "We were married in a past life," but Miss Lynch said the encounter at her house had left her feeling deeply ashamed and disillusioned. Quote, "I thought he was an amazing human," she said, "and he did this to me." Yeah, I think, again, anybody who's been through something where, it could be like a date rape or something, like you just are like, but wait a second, I thought they were an amazing person, and now I'm having like this conflict about this thing that I did not agree to, I said no to, bare minimum did not have enthusiastic consent to, that's just taken place. And then the implications of literally letting your brain go down the path of, could this person that I've been lauded as so heroic, could this person actually, no, he can be a rapist. Rapists are bad people. This is a good person. Here I am in the middle having to make sense of what a thing that just happened to me was. Pretty textbook of a groomer, manipulator, and a rapist, right? Like, and Kira's right there in the middle. So my heart goes out to her and all the women who have had to deal with all of these horrible assaults. It's a mindfuck. External acclaim and internal concerns. The Sound of Freedom movie had languished as an unfinished project for years. Filming was completed in 2018 with the actor Jim Caviezel starring as Mr. Ballard, but the filmmakers, including the Mexican director Alejandro Monteverde, had struggled to find a studio or platform that would bring it to the public. That changed when Angel Studios, a company that had found success distributing the television series The Chosen about the life of Jesus, acquired the rights last year. The company managed to raise $5 million from thousands of investors to distribute and market the film. It it gained further traction with a unique Pay It Forward campaign that had asked moviegoers to help fund tickets for even more viewers. Asterisks on that. A lot of stories going into the people paying for tickets, and that just went into Angel Studios pockets. And at his golf club in New Jersey, Mr. Trump hosted a screening of Sound of Freedom.
Mr. Trump. Okay. The movie depicted Mr. Ballard as savior driven to action by moral fury, willing to risk his life to save children from sex slavery. God's children are not for sale, his character says in what became the film's tagline. But before the movie was released, the concerns about Mr. Ballard were intensifying inside his nonprofit. Records show that one female employee, who is not part of the current litigation, filed an internal complaint at Operation Underground Railroad, describing Mr. Ballard as a master manipulator and detailing graphic sexual scenarios that he had her perform as part of their undercover operations. There's more women than what's in the litigation and what's been, and that's sad reality is that sexual assaults rarely get reported. In fact, I think it's something like 85 to 90% of most sexual assaults never get reported. They never talk about it because why would they? I mean, they went through this traumatic experience, then telling somebody about it, it's like it's already happened. You can't undo what has happened. And there's so much shame and fear around it that they don't go reported. And perpetrators count on that in order to continue doing what they're doing. And Utah is no exception. Utah has very high rates of sexual assaults, especially among minors in Utah. And at some point, we're going to have to go into those stats because the idea that an Utah-based anti-child sex slavery organization would need to go to a foreign country to save kids when it's rampant and is a huge problem right here in Utah.
Yep.
That just doesn't make any sense. But it does for if you have other motives behind it.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right, continuing. Yeah. She called him a master manipulator. We're having cult leader by Celeste, and then this woman, master manipulator, detailing graphic sexual scenarios that he had her perform as part of their undercover operations. After the organization cut ties with Ballard, Mr. Beck, who had been a longtime friend and supporter of Mr. Ballard, said on his podcast that he found reports about Mr. Ballard's behavior to be disturbing and described himself as feeling completely duped.
Yep. Because he believes the women. He's so... All right. Yeah. So Sound of Freedom, nonetheless, turned into one of the year's most successful films, out-earning the latest Mission Impossible and Taylor Swift's concert film in domestic box office sales. Now that, as a Swiftie, makes me the most upset. Just kidding. One of the people who was excited to see Sound of Freedom was Miss Lynch's mother, Jill Peterson, who had long followed Mr. Ballard's career. Miss Peterson invited her daughter to see it in a theater. Ms. Lynch declined. This must be so hard. My gosh. When you can't tell your parents what your interactions with their hero actually entailed. Wow. So Ms. Lynch declined, but it was not until 2 months later that she found the courage to explain why. She drove over to her mother's house. Quote, "I've been trying to tell you something for a while," she stated then, sobbing. Ms. Peterson said that what her daughter went on to share that day took her breath away. She pulled her daughter onto her lap, holding her tight. She remembers her daughter expressing a wish to die and herself feeling waves of regret and betrayal wash over her. "I believed in the cause. I believed in the man," she said. And that is the end of the article.
Yeah, let's overwhelm Kira in the comment section with support for having the courage to come out and put the most vulnerable, awful parts of her life in the public eye for the greater good.
Like Kira, Celeste,
she's got all of my respect, as much as I can possibly give her. Let's show her that in the comments.
Yes, I cannot say enough good things about these women. Not just, I think there's this bent like Tim Ballard has where he's calling you, Ryan, that you're like an anti-Mormon, and you and me, just like this is an anti-Mormon cause. And if somebody wants to call me anti-Mormon, that is their, you know, there's a long history of like exposing things about the LDS Church, and you're either faith promoting or not faith promoting. I'm in the not faith promoting. I don't believe it's a true religion. But if you put that to the side for a second, the reason why I left the Mormon Church and I help give people resources, typically how I have for the last 4 years, is because like if it works for you, that's fine. But there are people who are seeking truth and have been harmed and spiritually manipulated inside this institution. So this angle that this is just, where does the anti-Mormonism end? If it's me who's accused of that, fine, you can call me that. I think this is pro-truth, pro making the Mormon Church healthier to belong to, pro exposing corruption, pro exposing like the corruption of the theocracy that's alive and well within the state of Utah, and making sure that these women who I absolutely believe I've seen the evidence and I have met, it's exposing what Tim Ballard did to them under the guise of saving kids and sharing the most horrific, vulnerable pieces of their life, and just lifting up their voices and making sure that they don't feel alone. Because as Ryan, you can attest, we've talked to them, and it's been a very, very, very difficult couple of years for them. And podcasts that we've put out like this or sometimes are the only thing that they can really turn to where they don't feel alone and that somebody's listening and paying attention to them. So I've been a victim of sexual assault in my life, and anyone else out there listening, I think you might know that one of the most important paths to healing is first being believed, and people not just thinking you're crazy or you're stupid or you shouldn't have put yourself in that position, or victim blaming. There's all different nuances and sides to different stories. But in this case with Tim Ballard, the evidence is overwhelming, and validating and uplifting the voices of these victims is what this podcast is really all about. So really appreciate any comments saying that you understand and you believe these women as well, and to keep fighting. And hopefully more people and more insiders will come forward as well. And we can all kind of link arms to take down this predator so he cannot do this to anyone else. Something that I wish happened much sooner, but did not. So where does the anti-Mormonism label start and where does it end? Ryan, you've been labeled by Tim as an anti-Mormon. Yeah. I've been labeled that. Is the New York Times anti-Mormon for publishing this? Is the Mormon Church anti-Mormon for kicking Tim Ballard out? I don't know. So those are my final thoughts and my rants. Anything else from you, Ryan?
I would just say, yeah, thank you so much. I already see the comments coming in of support. This has been a hard few hours. I don't even know how long we're going now. It's ugly. It's depressing. We're right with you. It feels like you need to take a shower after work because it's just so dirty and disgusting. But the thing that I've seen in the comment section of a lot of these videos and stuff is just the overwhelming support from people out there that don't have a dog in the fight, but are expressing support and love for these women. And I know that makes a world of difference in their lives. It absolutely makes a world of difference in their lives and my lives, and it helps me to keep going in this really, really dark space. So thank you for everybody that's participated. I also hope that media in Utah will take their job seriously and follow the New York Times lead and start covering this here in Utah. Like, yeah, it's a stain on the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but there's still time to come forward and right this ship, right the wrongs, support the women, help this cause, and at least clean up our own mess. So I hope we can do that.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I got.
Absolutely. Thanks. Absolutely. Well said. Well, this concludes our podcast. Please, if that wasn't enough of a pitch for us to continue amplifying these voices. Me and Ryan do this because we're passionate about it, but it also does take time and money to put this podcast out there. And it would be amazing if we could have some more donors come through so that we can keep this podcast going and fundraise for our documentary that we're working on that has some pretty big people interested in working with us. So we will have a lot of projects that we want to be able to share these stories and amplify these voices, and all leading to, Tim Ballard not being able to do this to anyone else and him falling from grace, so to speak. So the only way to really do that is just keep talking about it. And it'd be amazing if, to keep talking about it, we had some donors come in. So a great place to support us is over on Patreon. And there's different behind the scenes stuff that we have over there that we pump out on a pretty consistent basis, more evidence and things that we are not putting out to the general public. So please, for just a couple bucks a month, you can go be on our Patreon, watch all of our videos ad free, and get some other perks and things like that. I have links to our Venmo and our donor box. I have a nonprofit called the NYT Foundation. That means that all donations to donor box are tax deductible in the United States. So give with your heart. It would be amazing to keep doing this podcast and fundraise for our future projects and documentaries. So other than that, it's absolutely free just to hit the subscribe button and the bell for notifications so you don't miss a video. Leave any comments of support and thumbs up for this video that you can. This is my very YouTube-y outro, but it's part of being able to do this work and hopefully make it sustainable. So thank you, Ryan. Thanks for your contributions and all you do. Thank you to our live audience for sticking with us. And hey, Ryan, have you heard about get close.
Tim Ballard? Yeah. Did you know that Timmy did
What?
podcast? Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.